Bartlett Committee of the Whole meeting for July 3rd, 2018. I call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll. Thanks for being here, Jennifer.
Trustee Kammerer?
Here.
Carbonaro?
Here.
DEYNE?
Yes.
Cabrera?
Here.
Hopkins?
Here.
Ranky?
Here.
President Wallace?
Here. First item on our committee agenda this evening is under Finance and Golf Committee. Chairman DEYNE.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first item we have on the agenda is Bluff City SSA refinance. And with that, it's discussion only. I'd like, well, Jim, actually, are you taking this or Todd?
Actually, Todd.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Right, I can give you the short explanation of what's going on. Back in 2004, $16 million in special service area bonds. A special service area was created for the Bluff City Industrial Park in Cook County. $16 million in bonds was issued to finance the infrastructure of the industrial park. That was all funded by the special service area taxes that were put on those properties. At this time, the developer and the taxpayers, or the developer, which is the taxpayer, would like to refinance it to reduce the cost. So there's $5,550,000 still outstanding. They pay $925,000 a year in principal. So there's 6 payments left. But right now they're carrying a letter of credit that puts an additional 1.3% annually onto the cost of the debt. So to cut back on the expenses, they'd like to refinance. We would issue bonds. The developer is actually going to purchase the bonds. That would eliminate the need for the security. They can eliminate the letter of credit, the 1.3%. Currently, they're variable rate bonds. The rates are starting to creep up a little bit. They're still at about 1.5%, but they could continue to go up. The new interest rate would be based on prime rate, which is going to be variable. So we'll have the same. We'll set a tax levy for the life of the bonds, but then we'll abate them to basically 1% over prime to make sure that money is collected to pay the annual debt service. So that is the short, non-technical answer to explanation of the bonds. If you have any questions, I can get into that, or we can get into more technical things.
This TIF district expires in 2022?
Yeah, the last levy would be 2022. I think the final payment is December of 23 is when the last payment would be.
The way these work is they show up on the tax bill as a special service area, so the owners of each of those parcels has a separate PIN, has a separate line item on their tax bill. Since they're one and the same, Bluff City LLC, they're paying the taxes, so they receive some income tax relief. These are taxable bonds. They're non-recourse, which means the village is not on the hook at all. These are paid solely by the real estate taxes, the special service area taxes that show up on the tax bills. So, they're not backed up by the full faith and credit of the village, as would be the case with general obligation bonds. So, Adrian DeBangai, who represents Bluff City, is here this evening in case you have any questions of the developer. And we've had the bond counsel on this is Ice Miller, who's done a couple of different issues. The establishing ordinance for the SSA, that was done years ago. That's not changing. It need not change. It's simply a restructure of the bond ordinance that was that original 6.1 million. It's down, considerably, and it's really about savings, and they're paying all the costs of the village in connection with this.
So this is going to save the developers
Yes.
and the people paying the taxes money?
Yes. Yeah. Right now, that's kind of one and the same, the people paying.
And
What's
it's
the
not costing us anything.
1.3% LOC? Is that 1.3% of the original 16 million?
It's the
Got a
outstanding.
letter of credit sitting out there for like $1 million.
No, it reduces as the principal gets paid down, so it's in
They're
the,
able to release the entire LLC now.
Right.
yes.
Gives them the capacity
Yeah,
to,
it's over, it's about $80,000 a year right now.
yeah. I don't see any downside at all. Okay. Move that on to, is that a vote we have to have next meeting?
Now, yes, at the next
Yep.
meeting, the ordinances attached to that will be brought before you. A couple of the blanks will be filled in when final numbers get finalized. But essentially, the ordinance that's in the packet will be the ordinance that'll be brought before the board at the next meeting.
All right.
Okay, we're all set to move on?
Yep.
All right, next item we have on our agenda here is the discussions of responses to requests for proposals for broker consultant services to the village's health, dental, and life insurance program. And Janelle, if you would be so kind, do you remember Cliff Notes? You don't remember Cliff Notes?
Yes, I do.
Oh, I was hoping you'd say no. Can you please give the board the Cliff Notes version of what's happening here?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
That's a summary. That's a short version.
Got it. So, as you're aware, we were required or requested by the board to send out an RFP for broker services for the village for the medical, dental, and life insurance. And in doing so, we received responses from 9 brokers. We selected 5 brokers to move on to do presentations before the board, and you were all present for those. And so upon hearing all of those presentations, now we've come to the point where we would like some direction from the board as to whether or not you would like to continue being serviced by our current broker, Paul Miller, through Arrakis Group out of Bartlett, or choose another broker to take over that responsibility. In doing so, staff is committed to, I guess one of the things that we realized in all of the presentations is that they all have opportunities for cost savings. And so, you know, that's what we're here for, that's what we want to look at. And so any one of them can provide those services. We just want direction from the board as to who you would like us to do that with.
Any comments?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns that I had when the gentlemen from Arrakis Group spoke is why haven't we been utilizing these cost-saving measures? So if we're not going to use them, then that's a serious issue. So do you have plans, if we pick the Arrakis Group again, to utilize their methods to try to save the taxpayers money?
I think what we've learned through this process is that there are a number of different ways to skin that cat. I can't entirely speak to the years past because I wasn't involved in that deliberation, and nobody sitting up here was either.
You did approve the last one.
Yeah, and the last one had some changes to the structure of the plan for the first time in 35 years.
And we didn't save any money.
Well,
Actually,
well,
our
we did-
premiums went
no,
up.
we are saving some money. We're saving some money in terms of visits to, you know, what we're paying in terms of, we changed the structure, so some people came off and some people came on, so we changed that level. And we also changed the emergency care fee. Those were changes, and yes, they were incremental. It was my first crack at it. I think there are certainly other things that we can do with the design and with practices with our employees that are available. There are things that are available now that weren't available. A lot of that digital doctoring, a lot of other structures and sources that weren't available 5 years ago, 10 years ago are available now. I would also say that we're our philosophy as a community, as a village board has changed in that time frame as well. I certainly got the message loud and clear from you, and we started this process. First time we've ever done anything like this. So, well, in terms of, looking at structure and changing like that. I mean, we certainly looked at other things before, a few years ago, and when we looked at self-insurance and some of those other things. But, so the wave of change, I think, has been coming for a while. I've given this a lot of thought, and I take Jim's comments to heart that, can't really bring a hammer down, right? We're in negotiations, that's not really, feasible. But I think what really is feasible is looking at a longer period of time to build a program that reduces costs over time, that make it palatable to our employees and, for their families and for their, our composite for our claims, for a better word, and our experience levels. I think there's lots of ways that we can make those changes, and we can make them with our current broker, or we can make them with the new broker. I'm certainly committed to doing that, and I think with a proper structure, we can do it in a way that doesn't alienate anybody.
Thank you, Paula. I was impressed with Rockus Group and their straightforwardness with us, and so that would probably be my pick. That's just my thoughts.
I don't know if I'd be out of line asking this question. I know that the mayor normally does this, but we've had a chance to listen to the presenters of the companies that were before us, and I know we all have some personal feelings on this. And I wonder if I'd be out of line if I asked if we could take a straw poll and on whether or not we should stay with our current vendor or not.
Well, I'd like to hear if there's anybody else on the board that has any other comments first.
No,
I guess one of my concerns is, despite the attempt to paint us as someone that wants to kick a child out of the hospital, which I wholeheartedly object to.
Yeah.
This is something that we have been talking about for a very, very long time. And I understand that, the lack of movement is not attributable to you, right? Because you're relatively new to the role, so it's not a personal attack to you. But it's something that we've been talking about for a very long time. So when you say, well, over a long term, I understand. I don't think anybody up here wants to bring a hammer down, wants to upset employees. We want to treat employees with respect and make sure they're taken care of. But at the same time, we got to get the show on the road here, because we've been dealing with this for years, and very little, if anything, has been done.
And I guess I should clarify my comment when I say over a period of time. I'm not talking about little incremental things over a period of time. I'm talking about having a goal that, what are the steps that get us to that goal? Instead of tweaking, little tweaks, each time. I think we have to figure out where our end game is and then figure out how to get there. And maybe that's a big change, maybe that's a little change. There are some structural things that I think we can still accomplish that are big, and then I think there are the little things too. I think it's a composite, and I think what we need to do as an organization is define where we want that to be, and then figure out a plan that gets us there.
One of the things that bothered me about the presentations, first, I liked the idea of the metrics, the biometrics, but I didn't like the idea of lining you all up and sucking your blood out and running all kinds of tests. It sounded awful, it sounded expensive, and it sounded invasive.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, I agree with
that's
that.
the other thing I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about us not saving any money, and I'm concerned about, harassing you and making you go through all these tests.
On a personal note, so when my husband worked for the Village of Palatine, they had that option for families. And I found it the opposite. I found it as me not having to bother my doctor, have to bother to go to the doctor. It literally took 15 minutes, and I had an entire 6 or 10-page pamphlet of all of my health variables, the levels at which they were were they optimal, were they not optimal, and then what changes could I make to improve those the next time? And it almost became, between my husband and I think between him and his coworkers, a contest. Who could improve, so, so it didn't feel invasive.
Okay.
I'll just share that, I'm
But
sorry.
it wasn't done for convenience, it's done for gathering the data,
I think-
right?
I
To
think
flesh out our
both.
population.
I think both though, so that that our employees have a better picture of their health, because some of them just won't go to the doctor unless they broke something, have the flu, or can't breathe and they have, so I think that it's both.
It's early detection medicine, basically.
It's
Did
becoming
you-
more and more common, and with many, my wife's company does this, and she gets the benefit of having the lab results and the things that they do on site, and it's a great,
It was an asset, I
I
thought.
think all the brokers have the ability, that we spoke to, have the ability to do that type of testing.
So we heard presentations, and they were all very good presentations, but none of us, I don't believe, had the opportunity to speak with them behind the scenes. And likely you did, and you are the expert, Janelle. This is what you do for a living, and Paula, talking about the architecture of a new program and setting goals, did you feel that there was a standout among those groups on communicating behind the scenes that is going to help you get those goals achieved?
Well, I'll start, Janelle. Personally, my perspective is that no one came in through their presentation or through their discussions with Janelle and Todd and I that said, oh, yeah, these are the people, we've been doing it wrong, these are the guys we need to go with. We didn't get that.
Okay.
And what we got was a little bit of the same thing from each of them, some good and some bad. So there was nobody who was a standout, in my mind.
I agree. If I could take bits and pieces from each presentation and encompass them all into one broker, we would have the perfect broker, right? And I think actually there were some really interesting factors that I looked at in terms of like things that were never brought to us before. In terms of cost-saving strategies, there were some interesting ones that I thought were a little odd, but again, I think that any one of the brokers have the ability to assist us with this process. A few of them talked about insurance committees, and Paul and I have discussed those before, and I don't know if those are like the answer or not. The biometrics, again, I don't know if that, that could work. It may be a benefit, it may not. Our concern is if you do testing like that, how much is that costing us? Because we're trying to cut costs, and then now we're talking about adding a $300 bill to each person that's covered. So I'm not seeing a cost savings there. Again, long-term, yes, but so I think there was not a clear standout. Our focus, again, was when we reviewed each response, we looked at cost-saving strategies. And there were some interesting, like I said, there were some interesting things that I've never even seen before. And so, under Illinois continuation, we have to offer our pensioners, a lifetime of benefits on our plan. They pay 100% of the premiums, but you're carrying those claims with you. So, a couple of them talked about carve-outs for those individuals and such. So, that's something that we haven't looked at in the past. But I think that, again, there was no real standout, honestly. We looked at, again, too, at municipal experience, thinking that, they could bring some other ideas to the table that other communities have looked at doing and instituting for cost-saving measures, and we could look at some of those things. So, but again, any one of them can do the job.
are there any inherent risk or dangers as we contemplate changing to a different broker that somehow, some way, we could have employees that are uninsurable? I mean, if we switch to a different broker, and we would always be able to insure everyone, is that correct?
Correct. No. Under under current law, actually, the pre-existing condition
Okay.
clause is still remains, although there's fear that that's going to be taken away. But that comes into play when people lose coverage. There's a lapse in coverage. It's not a continuation. So I don't have a concern for that. So thank you for asking. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Good.
I think that's an answer that's better served by the underwriter. That's something you can answer.
Is your mic on, Vince?
Sorry?
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I don't think that's an answer that you can give. That's an answer for the underwriter. It is a major concern when you switch from one policy to another, when you have people that have pre-existing conditions or current claims that they can be denied. So I only have one thing to say. I take offense to the officer that showed up tonight because the phrase that we're putting the hammer down, no changes were made to our policy since 1991 to 2015. That's 24 years. Made no changes to our policy. Putting the hammer down is telling you next year we're going to cut your monies from the state by $500,000. That's putting the hammer down. This is 24 years. So a change is inevitable. And I think Mr. Miller had stated that our current policy is still under 1990 premiums, coverages. This policy is antiquated. There's nobody out there that has this kind of coverage anymore. So what we need to do is go back to our current agent, have them suggest what is current in today's market, and see what kind of savings we can have just by going back up to 21st century coverages. $1,250 single deductible? I mean, you can get a triple bypass for $1,250. Oh, that's happened here. That's ridiculous.
Mine costs $250,000.
Well, you should have worked here.
Oh, yeah, not out of my pocket.
So I think we stay with the current agent that we have. My discussions with him have had some concerns about moving to different insurance companies. I'm talking about the medical, not the dental and the vision. That may cause problems for some other employees. We stay where we're at. Have him present something, and maybe this time listen to him and implement that. Because it's a two-part. It's not only increasing the deductibles, it's changing the employee participation. It's going to have to be a little bit of both. That's my opinion.
We got that solved. It's a very contentious issue, insurance is. It has been since Obamacare roared its ugly head, and since insurance premiums have been going up, skyrocketing for 20 years or whatever. On behalf of the board, I just want to assure the employees this isn't a personal discussion about how well you perform your work. This is a discussion about the comments that we get at home when we're deciding in the general public, do I go with my wife's coverage or do I go with my husband's coverage? And those are pretty close typically, the amount that's going to come out of that employee's pocket. So it's a difficult decision for the board, but as we well understand, some changes need to be made. And I hope that everybody kind of gets that. But it certainly is no reflection on how we feel about your general overall productivity. It is, as a matter of fact, an expense to the board, one of the largest expenses that this village has, which in turn is one of the largest expenses our taxpayers have, which in turn leads us to make sure that we're really making some decisions that would best represent some movement toward a better understanding of how the general, because we all get comments from the general public about, wow, you know, what's going on with this healthcare because now it's such a big hot topic. So making some movements, I would agree with most of the board here that I think it doesn't matter what agent or broker you go with. They're all coming from the same well. These policies out there are all the same. I think the one that we've gotten used to and accustomed to is the one I would prefer staying with. I've in the past owned companies and changed brokers and policies and companies, and it is a nightmare trying to get used to who you're dealing with again. So I would be in favor of sticking with the same group that we have. And one final comment, when they were making all their presentations, and some of them had multiple people sitting up there, those are multiple salaries that they're going to have to pay, and they're probably going to give you the same type of service that you would get from the smaller companies. So this isn't a 2,000 person policy. This is limited number. And when they say, well, we're one of the biggest in the country, the only thing that made me think about was, well, I wonder how much it costs to run your operation, because you got to make that money somewhere.
Right. Bigger is not necessarily better.
I would be in favor of the local group, and again, and echoing some of the other comments, trying to have them come back to us and say, hey, look what we can do. What do you think about this? What do you think about these particular changes? I'd love to see that.
Is there any way we can implement a program like that? I believe, I may be mistaken, but I believe that the health insurance is the second largest expense the village has, or just other than payroll. Is there some way that we can have some input on what's taken place and how we can review the program and structure the program in a different manner, not sacrificing what we have, but by implementation of something other that I'm not aware of, and a reduction?
I think what, well, first, what I'd say is that the notion that health insurance or any other expense would be off the table for review just isn't how we operate, right? So it's certainly not beyond the pale for us to take a good hard look at this expense and figure out a way to do it better. That's what we do with everything.
Well, like when we go through the budget.
Want to do it
you
here.
know, We,
And-
sometimes line item by line item, we go through the budget, and there's certain things
That's
that we
right.
cut out, you know.
And so what I would want to do is I'd want to sit down with the broker, come up with that goal, come up with that plan, and bring that back to you to take a look at and let us know what you like about it and what you don't.
Sold.
Well, when you come back to us, because we've been through this before, and again, not taking a shot at you,
Budget.
but I've been through this before, and, oh, well, we have to hurry up and do it now because we have to hurry up and renew. And that's a ruse, it's a game, it's cover.
We moved
And I'm not implying that you would do that, but I think the expectation here is that there'd be plenty of time for us to review whatever the plan is, whatever the goals are, and however we're gonna implement it, without having, a 2-week window to do it.
Oh, I absolutely agree. We had, that's why we started this process the month after we renewed,
Yeah.
so that we would have the time to do it.
It's appreciated, I know you've done a lot of
We
work.
certainly want to make sure that we have time to look at it and discuss it, and we don't feel pressured. Absolutely.
When is the final deadline that we would have to make a decision
On the broker or on the program?
on the broker?
Well, I would like that as soon as possible.
Who to talk
I think this would,
Renewal's right around the corner again.
I think we could run a straw poll now on the broker, if everybody's comfortable doing that. And from what I've heard, I would just run a straw poll and say we stick with the existing broker, and I would be in favor of that. Good?
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I just want to make sure that the
Right.
plan that they've set forth is acceptable to the board.
Right?
So I don't know how long that process could
I'll
take.
definitely go with the majority here. I have some
okay
mixed feelings about it.
With Arachnus as well.
Sorry.
I think they got to come to the table with some
Aaron?
things. but-
Yeah, I think they kind of get what we need to try to accomplish more than anyone else. Okay, so there's your direction for that.
Got it.
Our renewal isn't until next year, next March or something?
The renewal is January 1st, but
We
we
got
have to
until
have,
at least November to make these
correct, because
changes
you
and
have to,
decisions.
by law, you have to have it in advance, so people have the information to make an educated decision to make the changes, if they want to consider changes to their personal policies. So,
Well, and I'm more inclined to change the broker, but I understand what you're saying about changing riders in the middle of the race. So maybe it makes sense to see what Arrakis can do and then assess. I'm very skeptical of the entire process, so I just want to see what we can actually accomplish.
Well, we'll give them one person to go to and get some feedback from.
Trustee Reed,
Versus
did
all
you
of
have anyone else in mind?
There were a couple of different vendors, but it seems like the board's pretty interested in Arrakis, and I understand that, and I agree. But again, I'm pretty hesitant.
It's, I'm glad you're saying that because I also had some mixed feelings.
Sure.
About it. I really did. And sometimes I think that a fresh set of eyes might open up something that, we haven't looked at before.
But one of the things that all of these, because there were two vendors or brokers that stuck out to me, but none of them talked about how much it was going to cost. The only thing they talked about was taking your blood. That's the only cost that they really talked about. So I think the mayor's point on that is very well taken. How much would any of this actually cost? Even the materials were somewhat evasive on that point.
Yeah.
All right, do you know where we're headed with this now? Yes. Okay.
All right.
Mr. President, that concludes what we had on.
All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by trustee DEYNE, seconded by trustee Camer. Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Cameron,
Yes.
Carbonaro,
Yes.
Daney,
Yes.
Cabrera,
Yes.
Hopkins,
Yes.
Ranky.
Yes.
We are adjourned.